Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Nedarim daf Peizayin Nedarim 87. Let's start at the Mishnah on 86b. The Mishnah says, Nadra Ishto, let's say his wife makes a vow. Misavor Shenadra Bito. And for some reason, he thought it was his daughter who made the vow. Or Nadra Bito, or let's say his daughter made the vow, and some reason, Savor Shenadra Ishto. And for some reason, it turns out that it was his wife. Mishnah doesn't give us the example, but some of the Rishonim discussed, what if he's married to two women and one wife makes the vow and he thought it was the other wife who made the vow? Leave that for another day. Nadra ben Nazir, she makes a vow thinking she's a nut. She made a vow that she's going to be a Nazira, V'savar Shenadra B'Karban. He thought she just made a regular vow prohibiting one discrete item upon herself. Or Nadra B'Karban, or she makes a vow that she's prohibited in one discrete item. The Savar Shenadra ben Nazir, but he thought she was prohibited to be a Nazirite. Nadra Mita'enim, he thought she's prohibited in figs. She made a vow against figs. The Savar Shenadra ben Anavim, he thought she was making a vow against grapes. Nadra ben Anavim, he thought she was making a vow against grapes. The Savar Shenadra ben Ata'enim, but he thought she was making a vow against the figs. In all these cases, he has to go back the author. He has to repeat the rejection of the vow, because since he made the rejection with the wrong intent in mind, therefore we're going to say it's an ineffective rejection. So that's what the Ran says. Given the betalos have mahani since the hakama or the afara, since the upholding or the rejection was done with the wrong intent, it's not going to be effective. He has to go back and reject it. So the Gemara says, Lameimra, the Ani Osa Dafkahu. So this teaches us that when it says in the pasuk, V'im biyom shemoa isha, on the day that the husband hears her vow, Yani Osa, he could reject her. So from the word her, Osa, the Chachamim expound that the rejection does not apply until he knows for whom specifically he is rejecting the vow. That's the concept here. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, doesn't this contradict the teaching which we have about the hilchos of Kriya? Kriya is tearing one's garment. Well, Gabe Karayim, but with respect to the tearing of the garment, where we know that even though it's a rabbinic law, we have a source for it from a passage in the prophets where it says about David that he tore his garments when he heard about Al Shaul Val Yonasan. It says about David that he tore his garments when he heard about Shaul and about Yonasan. Al Shaul Val Yonasan beno. And he tore his garment for Shaul and for Jonathan, his son. And the Ran explains where the Gemara is going with this. The Ran says, and we could have said there that al is davka, that has to be correctly for them specifically. Sheyikro Hashem mace, that you need to tear the garments specifically on behalf of the one who died, and you shouldn't make a mistake and do it for the other person. But nevertheless, says the Ran, that we're going to learn that if you tore the garment with the wrong person in mind, it's still going to be effective. So we see from here that al is lav dafka. So why in the case of osa, by the vow, do we say it's dafka? So that's going to be the Gemara's question. So by the tearing of the garments, al shal va yonasan beno, vitanya, we learned in the Brisa, amulo, they said to him, they told him, your father died. Vikari tore his garment. And then he finds out, beno. Then he discovers, it was my son. It was his son who died. Achmano Hassan. Yatsi they create. He doesn't have to go back and tear again. We see that the al in that verse is not specific, even if the intent was wrong. So Amri lo kasha. So the Gemara says it's not a difficulty. Habastam, habamafarish. There are two types of ways you could tear the garment. One is where they told him somebody died, and so he went ahead thinking it was his father, and he tore the garments, and then he discovered, it was really his son. There we're going to say that's what the Brisa means when it says he doesn't need to redo it. But if it had been specifically told that it was his father, and he tore the garment on the basis that they told him it was his father, and then they come along and said, well, actually it was your son. Then we're going to say that we're Mayfair. Then we're going to say that that's the case of Mefarish, and he has to go back and re-tear the garment again. So that's what the Gemara says. Habastam, Haba Mefarish. Vatanya, we have a brisa that supports us. Amul Meis Aviv. This is the case of the Mefarish, where they told him specifically his father died Vikara, and he tears the garment. And then he discovers, oh, it was his son who died. He has not fulfilled his obligation of tearing the garment. But let's say they told him, listen, just somebody died. For some reason he thought it was his father, but they didn't specifically tell him that. And he tore his garment, and then he discovered it was his son. He fulfilled his obligation of tearing his garment. So that's the first way we say that the difference is that by tearing the garment also has to be specific if he knows in advance who it was. If they told him and then he messed up, but they told him it was this person, then he has to re-tear. But if it was just on a case of stam, he doesn't have to re-tear it. Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Rav Ashi says, no, the answer is kam b'toch k'dei dibor, kam achar k'dei dibor. Toch k'dei dibor literally means toch within, k'dei, the amount of time, dibor, speech. So if he gets the correction within the time, toch k'dei dibor, which is, there's a dispute whether it is Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, or Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Umori, the time it takes you to say that phrase. Then if he changes it within that phrase, within the time it makes to say that phrase, if he's corrected within that phrase and he has the proper intent within that amount of time, then he doesn't have to re-tear. But if it was done after that amount of time, then he'll have to re-tear his garment. That's what Rav Ashi says. So, and the Gemara explains, where do we say fulfill this obligation to tear? If they discover a son within the time it takes to say, if he discovers it was actually a son, then the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, and then he won't have to re-tear it. Whereas he not fulfilled his obligation after that time. And the Gemara explains, we have a brisa that supports this. Vatanya, here's a brisa again. The two in a row brises are b'nichusa. B'nichusa means that it's to support it. So, there are two brises in a row. We had two on the same dot. Vatanya, so let's say somebody has a sick person in his house. If the sick person faints, he thinks, oh, this sick one has died. Vikarani tears his garment. Only after they said he was alive, and only then did he die. Well, he has to tear it again. When do we say that he has to tear it again? Only when he died after this time of Tokadei Dibor, after a period of time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. But if he died within the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, Kidibor Dami. Then it's like he still has that same intent, and it doesn't have to tear again. The Gemara rules, if you change something within the time it takes to say something, it's in the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, it's like you haven't finished your sentence. With the exception of four major exceptions, it's supposed to be Megadev, somebody who Rahman al-San curses God, or the Kachavim, somebody who Rahman al-San worships idolatry, Mekadesh, somebody who betroths a woman, Megarish, or divorces a woman. All those cases, those four cases, we don't say, oh, you have a grace period of the time it takes you to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, but immediately we say you need to, whatever you say takes effect. The Ran tells us what's the pshat here, what's going on here. The Ran explains why are these cases different than the other cases. He says, so the Ran says that it seems to him, the Ran says, aside from those four cases, why in those four cases do we not apply Tokadei Dibor? Because people, when a person says something, they don't really mean every single word exactly. We give the person a chance to say, oh, I didn't mean to say it like that. You give a person a chance. But these four cases, they're so severe, when you're standing under the chuppah, you're saying every word. And so therefore, Chazara, therefore, if you say, oh, I want to take it back, it doesn't take effect. Like there, it's like pulling the trigger on a gun. You can't just say, oh, I didn't mean to pull the trigger. No, you don't have a chance. And so that's how the Ran explains it. The Ramban says that in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, that the Tokei Dibor is a reform, a takana that the rabbis made, because let's say there'll be a student who's purchasing something in the store and he sees his Rebbe walking by. We want him to be able to greet his Rebbe. And so therefore this whole concept is just so that a person can have the proper respect for the Rebbe and greet him while he's in the store. And he can't say, oh, I need to finish my business before greeting the Rebbe. So we want to allow him that time to interrupt himself and then go back to continuing with the business. And since we said the law there, the rabbi said it all across the board. But in these 4 cases, they're so strict. In these 4 cases, it's so strict that they're not going to apply them. Okay, so now we say in the Mishnah, Amra, if let's say she says, Konim te'enim vanavim elu shani toemes. She takes a vow, she says, I'm not eating these figs and grapes. Kiyim with te'enim kuokiyim. If she upholds the vow on the figs, then the entire vow is upheld. So meaning to say, she says, she takes a vow, she says, Konim te'enim vanavim. I vow I'm not eating figs and grapes. But then he comes along and he upholds the figs. We're going to say that the whole thing is upheld. Neder a vow that he that he upholds part of it, the whole thing is upheld. But let's say, hey, for what let's say he rejects the vow on as it relates to the figs. Then it's not rejected until he rejects also the vow on the grapes. The Ran gives 2 pirushim here. One parish is that the grapes, the vow as it relates to the grapes, are not rejected. The other parish is that even as it relates to the figs, the vow is not rejected. For sure now with respect to the grapes, but even now with respect to the figs, is it rejected? So those are the 2 perushim in the Ran. Amra konem te'ena shanito emes, ranava shanito emes. Let's say she says it like this. Let's say she says, she takes a vow and she says, I vow against figs that I'm not going to taste them. And then she says, and grapes. Meaning to say, she says it another vow, konem te'enim shanito emes, but she reformulates it. Ve'anava shanito emes, and a grape that I'm not going to eat it. Nedarim. She uses it like that. Now we're going to say that it's considered to be 2 vows. To say that if she rejects or upholds one of them, she can also reject or uphold the second one. So Mani must Nisan, who is our Mishnah like? We have to say that our Mishnah must be following the position of Rabbi Yishmael. How so? The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Isha Yekimenu v'Isha Yefirenu. It says with respect to her husband can uphold the vow, her husband can reject the vow. So what does this mean? Says the Brisa, Amra konem te'enim anavam elu she'ein shani to'emes. If she says, I take a vow about these grapes or these figs, Kiyam with te'enim kulam came. If she upholds the figs, everything is upheld. On top of Pei Zayin and Mabeis, Heifer with te'enim eno mufar ad sheyafar afa nevim. This is exactly like the position of our Mishnah. That if she upholds the figs, then everything is upheld. If she rejects just the figs, then it's not rejected. And again, the Ran has 2 pirushim. What does it mean it's not rejected? One is that the figs are not even the figs are rejected, and one is no, the figs are rejected, but not the grapes. Now it's the position of Rabbi Shmuel. So we see that our Mishnah is like the position of Rabbi Shmuel, but then we cite the Bryce. We see the 2 other opinions about this. Rabbi Akiva says, Harei Omer, Isha Yikimenu, Isha Yifirenu. No, the pasuk says, Isha Yikimenu, Isha Yifirenu. Her husband shall uphold the vow, her husband shall reject the vow. So what do we do with this? So Rabbi Kiva says to tell us, Ma Yikimenu Mimenu, Af Yifirenu Mimenu. Just like when it comes to Akama, it says if he upholds part of the vow, the entire vow is upheld. 3 words is from Yikimenu, mean Yakim Mimenu. Even if he upholds a part of it, the whole thing is upheld. Af yifirenu yafer mimenu. If he rejects a part of it, the whole thing is rejected. So Rabbi Kiva says, if he upholds part of it, it's all upheld, and if he rejects part of it, it's all rejected. So this is unlike Rabbi Shmuel says that none of it's rejected, or the grapes are certainly not rejected. Rabbi Kiva says the whole thing will be rejected. And then we have Rabbi Yishmael responds to Rabbi Akiva, Miksiv Yafer Mimenu. It doesn't say Yafer Mimenu. It just says Yefirenu. It doesn't say the whole, that even if you reject a part of it, it's all rejected. So why are you saying it's all rejected? Rabbi Akiva says, Makish Afara La'akama, because we're going to compare the Afara to the Akama. Ma'akama Mimenu. Just like the Akama, as long as you uphold a part of it, it's all upheld. Afafara Mimenu. As long as you reject a part of it, it's all rejected. Comes along the third approach is Rabbi Chia bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Zo devrei Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva. Aval Chachamim omrim. Chachamim say no. Makish hakama la'afara. We compare hakama to hafara. Ma hafara. Ma shehefer hefer. Afakama ma. So ma hafara ma shehefer lo hefer. We have to add in the word the different gears of the Ran. We have to add in the word of whoa, so that's how the Ram makes sense. So we say that just like when it comes to rejection, nothing takes effect. Also, when it comes to upholding, ma'afakama mashakiyim lo kiyim, what is upheld as not upheld. So now, according to this approach, we have according to this position, we have a third approach that nothing works. Rejection doesn't work if you just reject half of it, and the upholding doesn't work if you just uphold half of it. So we see three completely different approaches. One is that if you uphold part of it, it works for Akama, but not for Afara. Then there's approach of Rabbi Akiva that it says that it works completely for if you uphold part of it for Akama and Afara. Then we have the approach of the Chachamim cited by Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it doesn't work for either Akama or Afara. Then we said in the Gemara said, if she says, Konim te'ena shanito emes, ve'anavim shanito emes, that if she basically enunciates both of the vows as it relates to it, then we're going to say, then says our Mishnah, that these are two separate vows. And this reminds us of the Gemara citation, which we had earlier on Samach Vav, which quotes the Gemara from Shavuos in Daf Lamed Vav. And what's the Gemara? Amarava Masnisin Rabbi Shimon. Our Mishnah is like the position of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar that we had this statement, let's say a person swears that there are 5 people that come to him and they all say, you have our mashkon and you have our pawn. And he comes along and he says, I don't have anything. He says, I take an oath. I don't have it. Not to you. I don't know you. I don't know you. I don't know you. I don't know you. So then, according to Rabbi Shimon, that since he only says the Lashon of Shvuah once, he only says, I swear, I don't know you, I don't know you, I don't know you. Therefore, he's only in violation of once. So therefore, it's as though he does one violation of one oath. And so too in our Mishnah, when she says, Konim te'enim va'navim, we don't view it as 2 vows, but as 1 vow. But if she says, Konim te'ena shanito emes, ve'anava shanito emes, then we view it as 2 vows because she says this expression, I will not eat it on both of them. And so that's why Rabbi Shimon is saying that we're going to view it in that case, only in that case, it's 2 vows. However, the Chachamim say, even if she says, Konim te'enim va'navim shanito emes, we look at it as 2 separate vows. And the husband could do hakam or hafara. So the whole first part of our Mishnah is going only according to Rabbi Shimon, but the Chachamim will say even the first part is 2 separate vows. So that's what we're saying. So our Mishnah, all those 3 approaches must be only going according to Rabbi Shimon, because we see from the Seifa that the Seifa of the Mishnah that is Rabbi Shimon, and the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Shimon that say even the first case is 2 separate vows. Says the Mishnah, Yodei ani sheyesh nedarim, avol ina yodea sheyesh nefirin. So he says, I know that there are vows. I know that there's this concept of vows, but I don't know that you can reject the vows. That's what he says. I don't know that the husband is able to reject the vow. Then under those circumstances, yafer, he's still able to reject the vow afterwards. When he discovers that the husband can reject the vow, he can reject it the same day that they told him. Because until that day that he realized he's able to reject the vows, it's not called Yom Shamo. But let's say he says, let's say he says, I know that there are vows. Let's say he says, I know that there are vows of all any Odea should say Neder, but I don't know that this is a vow. I don't know that this is one of those vows that the husband is able to reject, that it's either a vow of Nefesh or Bino or Bina. Then Rav Meir Omer will yafer. Rav Meir says he cannot reject the vow, and the Chachamim say he can reject the vow. Let's see what the Ran says here. Rav Meir says he cannot reject the vow, and Ran brings two different approaches. He says Ika demandam, or there are some who say that he cannot reject it at all, meaning not today and not afterwards. Not after they told him, this is a vow you're allowed to reject. Why? Today he can't reject it because it's not called the day Yom Shamo. It's not called the day that he heard it, because it's only called Yom Shamo if he knows that he's able to reject it. So if he rejects it without knowing that he's able to reject it, that's not called hearing it, that you'll be able to reject it. And then after they told him that he's able to reject it, he also can't reject it because I'm right. So but then when they told him later on that he's able to reject it, Nami will yafer, he's still not going to be able to reject it. Why? Because now the first time he knew about it, and that was called the first day that he heard it, and so that day has passed. So he's lost the ability to ever reject it. That's the Ran's first explanation. Ran is going to have a second explanation, but just to repeat it because it's a radical explanation. He said in this case he can never reject it. In the circumstance where he says, I know there's rejection, but I didn't realize that this was the type of vow that I could reject. The mayor says he can never reject it. Why? You can't reject it the first day because it's not considered a Yom Shamo, a day of hearing it. If he didn't realize he can reject it, you have to have the knowledge. And then by the time he learns it, it's after the day that he heard it. Whereas the Chachamim say, Yafer b'yom zeh, they could say that on the day he hears it, he's allowed to reject it. Why? Even though he doesn't know that it's a type of vow he can reject it, because the Chachamim say, Miktsas yediyah kechol yediyah. They say a partial knowledge is like full knowledge. But once that day passes, he can't reject it. Because the first day was the day is called the day he heard it with respect to the ability that he can reject it. Those is the first approach of the Ran. The Ran gives a second approach. Ikaman the Amar. There's an alternative approach that when the mayor says, well, yafer, meaning to say that's only the next day that he hears it because the time has passed. But that very day, he's still able to reject it with this knowledge. And because since he knows that there are vows and that there's a rejection of the vows, it's called enough of a knowledge to be able to reject it, even though he didn't realize this was a neder. But the next day he can't do it. Whereas the Chachamim say he can still reject it the next day because he says that since on the first day he didn't know that this was a vow, it's not called yediyah. Because that's the two different approaches to the Mishnah. Again, the first approach of the Ran is that he can never reject it, not even on the first day. The second approach of the Ran is he could reject it on the first day. The Chachamim say the first approach, he could reject it on the first day. And according to the second approach, he could even reject it later because the yediyah was not considered a yediyah. So we'll stop here, the recording, continue for a few more minutes.